What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Fish the Moment. Today we're back on Lake Hamilton in Central Arkansas for the quote-unquote tournament day that I practiced for in my last Lake Hamilton video. We caught some pretty decent fish in my last video that I practiced in and had that one big bite offshore, and so hopefully I'll be able to put a bunch of big fish in the boat and beat the curse I have on this lake where I can't catch anything over like 12 pounds. So let's see if I can do it. So I decided to start in the back of Little Mazarn Creek, which is an area where I got several bites in practice and saw a ton of bait fish. And my plan going into this tournament day is to try to get a limit as quickly as possible in the morning and then head offshore and try to get some of those bigger fish that I found in the afternoon. And as soon as I got back into the back of this creek, there was bait fish kicking on the surface, there were fish busting all around me, and there was a ton of activity in my area. So I decided to start by throwing an Alabama rig down the bank, trying to get a big bite first thing in the morning. And I actually did get several bites on the Alabama rig, but all of them just swiped at the bait and didn't get it. And this is an Alabama rig with 5 hooks. And so, for whatever reason they were swiping at the Alabama rig, I think it was the lack of wind and the lack of current back in this area. And after having 3 fish short strike my Alabama rig, I realized that they were not going to eat this thing. And so, I quickly made the change to a jerk bait and cast it in front of a boat dock where I just missed one on the Alabama rig and hooked in my first keeper. Got him. There we go. Making the switch out from the Alabama rig to the jerkbait. Stay on there, fish. Kept on getting them to swipe at the Alabama rig, but they wouldn't eat it. So sometimes you can switch to a jerkbait. This fish barely has it though. There we go. Not a big one, but that's number 1 right there. Just a little keeper. Again, just trying to get 5 here. I shouldn't put that one on the board just to make sure. Just need to be 12 inches here. That's a 12-incher. If I can just get 5 of these in the boat with the jerkbait, and then they're not going to be big by any means. They're just going to be really small limit, but that's a 1 pound, 1.1 pound. So just a 1 pounder, but here's number 1 in the box. There we go. Got to start somewhere. Don't think there's a ton of big fish back in this area where I'm at right now, guys, but there are a bunch of fish kind of busting, chasing all around the boat right now. And so I'm hoping that I can get 5 really quick. And if I can, then I can transition to some of those deeper fish with the jig and just try to go for 5 big bites. Hopefully I can get a couple 1.5-pounders out of here as well. Not just all the little tiny ones, but there's a bunch of activity going on here. So I should be able to get a limit. No problem back in here. Got it. There we go. Number 2 right there. There we go. Number 2, same bait, just a Lucky Craft Pointer 100 in the Chartreuse shad color. Let that bait sit down there. Got another fish. Again, not big ones, but putting 5 in the box right now is kind of my goal. There we go, 1.2 pounds, because again, I'm going to sit out there for 5-6 hours offshore. I want to at least have 5 in the box to calm me down. So that's number 2 in pretty quick succession. So hopefully we'll be able to get another fish or 2 right here. I really would like to not have to run all the way up the lake to the Big Mazarn where I caught some fish yesterday. I feel like I can catch some really good ones up there, some 1.5-pound, 2-pounders. So I might still make that run. I'm a little bit, hopefully ahead of schedule by the time I leave here, but I have been fishing for about 30 minutes, have 2 keepers, pretty solid start, and if I can get just 3 more fish down this bank, I'm actually thinking about fishing back down this bank with a crankbait, because I did get a lot of good bites on the crankbait yesterday, and right now I'm just focusing on the Alabama rig and the jerkbait. So we'll see if that will get me a few more fish, and other than that, we're getting it going. So after catching my second keeper, I fished down the bank a little bit further, then spun back around and fished back down the bank where I caught those 2 fish. And for whatever reason, I couldn't get these fish to react to a crankbait, and then I kept throwing the jerkbait and did not get any more bites the entire way down the bank. And it seemed like I may have missed my opportunity this morning to get a limit. I missed 3 fish on the Alabama rig, and if I had started with that jerkbait, I probably would have had a limit in the boat. But I wasn't that worried about it. I only spent about 45 or 50 minutes in the back of this creek and had 2 keepers to show for it. So I decided to make a run out of the back of this creek and just run a couple places I'd fished in the past to see if I can get a bonus fish fishing on some banks I had history on. Got him. Running history helped right there. There we go. Number 3. That's what I'm talking about. Just running some spots I've caught fish on in the past. Woo! Don't get hooking me, fish. 1 second here, guys. There we go. Just saw a bank where I caught some fish on before. Had some shade on it, so it seemed like a pretty good spot. Let's try to throw a bait real quick and produce number 3. And so we're going to weigh this guy. Again, these are all 1-pounders, but we are hopefully going to call all these out by the end of the day. And maybe I can fish down this bank and not even maybe have to make the run up the lake. So that's a 1 pound even. So we have 3 fish for 3 pounds right now. Stellar day so far. But I know that these are just my limit fillers, just to give me a little bit of confidence. And who knows, I might catch a 5-pounder doing this too. And so a lot of times I like to just fish like this, get a limit in the boat quick, builds that confidence, and sometimes you can get lucky and get a good one, and then I can hopefully then sit offshore the rest of the day and get those 5 bites I really need. Honestly, I probably should just be sitting out there all day, but it always hurts when you don't show up with a limit in a tournament when you can catch them really easy. So I'll just take these first couple hours, get my limit, kind of calm myself down, and then go for the big ones. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good after just catching a keeper on a bank that I caught fish on in the past. And so I kept on running banks where I caught fish before and finally made it back to a pocket where I've caught a lot of fish in the past. And right away when I got in there, I actually hooked up with a fish and it came off on my crankbait, and it seemed like a pretty good one, maybe a 2.5 pounder. But I didn't let that get to me. I continued fishing down the bank, fished a couple brush piles with a jig, and then I hooked up into another fish. And it wasn't a big fish, but it was number 4, and so I fished further down this bank, didn't get any bites, decided to leave out of there, and then just kept running history on the way up the lake. And I really didn't get any more bites on any of my high percentage areas, so reluctantly I decided to head to the back of the Big Mazarn. And the reason I didn't want to up there is because it's just kind of a long run from my offshore areas I wanted to fish in. But I did feel like if I got back in there, I could get several fish in the boat quickly and maybe cull a few times, get some of the 1-pounders out of the boat. And as soon as I got back up in there, I noticed the conditions had changed a lot. First thing is that there was no current back in this creek, like none. And the day before, there was a lot of current pulling through this area. And I fished down a long stretch of bank and did not get a single bite. And I felt a little bit discouraged because I knew that this area has some good fish in it, but without that current, I wasn't confident that I was going to be able to get bit. And so I headed back out of this creek, ran one more bank where I caught them before, and then I had been fishing up shallow now for about 2 hours. And at the beginning of the day, I kind of gave myself a timeline. I said, if I don't have my limit after 2 hours of fishing up shallow, I'm going to abandon the shallow pattern and head offshore regardless of how many fish I have. And the reason for this is because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to compete in a tournament by catching the fish I was catching up shallow. I needed to get those fish offshore to bite if I was going to get that 15 to 20 pound bag of fish. And so even though I didn't have my limit, I had 4 in the boat, which is still pretty good. And if I'm going to catch any fish offshore, it'll give me my 5th keeper. And so I decided to make that run all the way down the lake back to my offshore areas and start picking them apart. And this part of the day is probably the most exciting for me, but it's probably the least exciting for the majority of fishermen out there. Basically what I did was drive around the lake, graphing over every single offshore brush pile, rock pile, or ledge I knew on Lake Hamilton. And what this means is that I graph for maybe 30 minutes to 45 minutes at a time without making a single cast. And this is on a tournament day. And this is something that blows people's minds a lot of times because they think that if you're not putting your bait in the water, you're not catching fish. Well, that's definitely the case when you're fishing up shallow. When you're fishing offshore, you can waste a lot of time if you're fishing an offshore area that doesn't have any fish on it. And fortunately, if you understand your electronics well enough, you can actually graph over areas and see if there are fish present in a brush pile or on a rocky spot or whatever. And you only need to fish these areas when you see fish on your graph. And unfortunately, on this day, I did not see that many fish on the graph that were actively feeding. And if you do want to know what fish look like when they're actively feeding on the Fishfinder, check out this video up here. But basically, I fished and graphed around for about 2.5 to 3 hours and didn't have a single bite, which is crazy because, you know, I had seen all those fish on my graph the day before in practice. I had got that one really big bite. And the reason I think that I was struggling to get bit offshore were for 2 reasons. The first is the lack of current. If you remember when I was in the back of the big Mazarn, I didn't see any current flowing. And yesterday, there was really good current flowing when I was fishing these offshore areas. And a lot of times what that current will do, again, is position those fish up out of the creek channels and out of the deeper water and pull them up onto offshore structure into the brush piles that are in shallower water. And for whatever reason, these fish were not pulling up. And so my assumption is that that current was just not flowing all day. And unfortunately, I didn't have any means to check what the projected current flow is on Lake Hamilton. The only thing I can do is look in hindsight to see if the current was flowing. And if we take a look at the current generation schedule for Lake Hamilton, you can see the current was flowing really strong on the 25th, the day of my practice day, at the end of the day. And that's when I saw all those fish pulled up on my offshore areas and when I got that big bite. But then the entire day of the 26th, they did not pull any current. No current was flowing. And so when that line on that graph is straight, that means the water level isn't changing, which means there's no current. When you see those big changes in the height of the lines, that means the current is flowing. And so unfortunately, no current was flowing all day on Lake Hamilton. And to add insult to injury, we also had the worst possible conditions in terms of weather for fishing offshore in the wintertime. If you take a look at the conditions, you can see that we have no wind and cloudy skies. And both of these things are not ideal for offshore fishing. First is the calm weather. A lot of times when you have really calm conditions, the fish like to suspend and pull off the drops because there's no currents to position those fish. And a lot of times if you have current on your reservoir like Hamilton does some days of the week, that current will position fish on the ledges even when there's no wind. But on days when there's no current, sometimes that wind blowing 10, 15 miles an hour will act as a natural current generator and will put those fish up on top of the ledges even when there's no man-made current. And so unfortunately there was no wind to generate additional current on this day, so there was no reason for those fish to pull up and feed. And the other thing that was playing against me is that it was a cloudy day. And as many of you guys know, when you have these cloudy conditions, these fish like to roam a lot more. And if the sun was out, that a lot of times will get the fish to hold tighter to cover, like brush piles, rocks, things like that. And so if we had a bright sunny day, most likely I may have found some of those fish pulling up out of the deeper water and into the brush piles I was graphing. But I graphed a ton of brush piles all day, did not see a single fish in one of these brush piles. And I graphed a ton of them. And I really didn't fish any brush piles all day. I just fished rocky spots that I saw fish around in terms of like they were off the drop or kind of around the area, but I could not get these fish to bite without the wind or without the current. And so really, I was facing the worst case conditions for offshore fishing. No current, no wind, cloudy skies. And this happens sometimes when you fish offshore. You sometimes just hit that bad day for offshore fishing and it's just really tough to get a bite. Not saying that you can't catch fish offshore in these conditions, but it makes it 10 or 15 times harder. And the reason that I kept sticking out offshore was because I knew the quality of the fish that lived offshore. And I also didn't have a lot of confidence fishing up shallow based on what I had done that morning. I basically just caught, 4 little 1-pounders. And so I felt like my best opportunity to catch a good fish was to continue to fish offshore and hope and pray that that current would start flowing, or maybe the wind would start blowing, maybe the sun would pop out, something would change. Unfortunately, after fishing offshore for 6 hours straight, the conditions never changed and I didn't catch a single fish. And this is the scary truth about fishing offshore. A lot of times you can be fishing in the right area of the lake, in the right depth, with the right bait, around the right structure and the right cover and not catch any fish. And that all comes down to having the right conditions that are gonna get those fish to feed offshore when you're there. And so a lot of times these fish are not going to be feeding offshore when you pull up to a specific spot or just go to the lake that day in general. And sometimes it's really hard to tell when that happens. And so there are days when I go out fishing offshore, like on this day, where I goose egg, I don't catch anything. And that's why I like to start up shallow and try to get a few fish in the boat first to calm my nerves, because I know that you can go hours and hours and hours and hours without catching a fish. I also know though that if that current started generating in the last hour of the day, I could have pulled up on any one of these areas and caught 20 pounds of fish in 5 casts. And looking back on my day, I wasn't that disappointed in any of the decisions I made, and I felt like I put myself in good position to catch fish. But one thing that I was thinking about all day is how to get the fish that I saw suspended off the drops on my side imaging to bite. And right after I fished this tournament, I saw Cody Huff win 2 tournaments in a row in Toledo Bend Reservoir using the Garmin Live Scope and a jigging spoon to catch fish that were suspended in the middle of creek channels and off deep main lake points on Toledo Bend. And I feel like I may have been able to catch a few of those fish that were suspended off the drops on Hamilton if I had that live scope technology. I did try throwing a spoon and a drop shot in the Alabama rig off the drops trying to get those suspended fish, but didn't have that much success. But that live scope would really allow me to pinpoint where those fish are in the water column and pitch my bait straight to them. And so looking back, this is probably the only thing I would change about this fishing day. Instead of trying to fish on top of the drops so much, I probably would have tried to fish a little bit more off the drops and try to catch some of the suspended fish, even though the conditions again were just really tough for offshore fishing. And it probably would have been best just to go back to the bank and try to get 12 or 13 pounds in the boat like I normally do. But I was kind of swinging for the fence in this tournament. I was treating this as like a one-day derby with no points on the line, and so why not stick offshore and try to put a big bag in the boat? And so this is the struggle of being an offshore angler. This is the challenge that I face every time I go to the lake trying to catch fish in on-the-water fishing lessons or just offshore when I'm fishing in my videos. And usually what I like to do is have that backup pattern of the shallow fish and the offshore fish in case the offshore fish aren't biting. And on Hamilton, I just didn't really have that much confidence up shallow. I had more confidence offshore, so this lake is still my nemesis, arch nemesis. I can't figure this lake out for whatever reason. I know that you can catch fish just throwing an Alabama rig down the bank all day long, but to me that just isn't very fun, or that it doesn't involve that much skill, I guess, so I don't like doing that. But regardless, I hope that this video at least was enlightening in the fact that offshore fishing isn't this cure-all that works all the time when you go to the lake. Sometimes you're gonna have days where you struggle, you don't get bit, you don't catch anything, and that is okay. But there's also a lot of days when you can pull offshore and catch some giants and catch them every single cast. So don't get discouraged if you are trying to catch fish offshore. Just sometimes you have to suck it up and go through some of these bad days to get to those really, really good days. And so hope you guys enjoyed this tournament day video. Definitely a really good learning experience for me as well, and something that I'm going to take into my upcoming tournament videos. And as many of you know, I am going to be starting to fish the BFLs as well as the Beaver Lake Elite Series events. So I'll have about 15 or 20 tournaments I'm going to fish this year with like actual money on the line with other competitors. And so hopefully I'll be able to take what I learned from these practice tournaments to do really well in upcoming tournaments in the future. So thanks again for checking this video, guys. Hope you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you all in the next one.